The Golden Age of Comic Books, month number 14. These are all the comics with a cover date of July 1939. This ties in with the release of Action Comics number 14 and the 14th month in a row that Superman has appeared in comic books. Let's look at all the comics on the newsstand this month. There were 22 of them in total. We'll see that the hefty publishers at this time included DC Comics and Centaur Publications, who had the most titles. The most valuable comic by far of the month is Detective Comics number 29, $11,000 for a low-grade copy, or $185,000 in near mint. The reason this book is so valuable, it is the second cover ever to feature the character Batman, and it is also the third appearance of Batman ever. And he would now run in every monthly issue of Detective Comics. After that, the most valuable comic on the list is Adventure Comics number 40. This is also a very major, important book in the growth of the superhero boom. The Sandman begins monthly in Adventure Comics. So this is the first superhero issue of Adventure Comics from DC. DC was now on a roll with their superhero titles. Superman and Action Comics were now the best-selling comics ever in this comic book format. And so DC was quick to cash in and release more and more of these heroes. And this month was an important one for that development. If we look at what else was coming out, Fox Comics had Wonder World Comics number 3. This was a title change and the first issue with this new title. And this series would run for a few years. And quite a hefty price tag. This is a highly collected series. $866 for a low-grade copy of this book. Other highlights of the month include Action Comics number 14, which again is an early Superman appearance, but Superman does not appear on the cover. And that book is worth over $1,000. And other highlights include Amazing Mystery Funnies Volume 2, Number 7 at $423 for a low-grade copy. Now, there's two things that make books valuable. Either their historic importance or their rarity. We're talking about comics from 1939 here. These are all extremely hard to find in any condition. And the CGC census demonstrates this. We can see that if you take every comic released that month, take every copy in all conditions graded, including restored copies, there's only 219 comics have been graded. And the bulk of that actually comes from the DC titles, which of course are the most highly collected. We see that Detective Comics number 29 is far out ahead. 52 copies have been graded by CGC, but only one copy has been graded a 9 or higher. Also common on the list, Adventure Comics number 40, 34 copies, and Action Comics number 14 with 39 copies. So those are the three big key books with high price tags that have brought out a lot of copies to be graded. After that, we get into the Centaur books, which seem to be the next most common. But there are some books that are so scarce, including Comic Pages Volume 3, Number 4. This is from Centaur. There are 0 copies graded in any condition. And that just shows how tough some of these Centaur books are to find. Also, we find that Super Comics number 14 has 0 copies graded, and Popular Comics number 41 has 0 comics graded. However, the case for these two books is that because they have quite a low price tag, it's not very profitable for anyone to grade these books, and that is most likely the reason there are no copies graded at all. Nevertheless, if there were any high-grade copies out there, you would think somebody would grade them, but there just are none graded at all. There were 22 comics on the newsstand this month, which ties with 22 last month. Out of the 22 comics, 3 of them have 0 copies graded by the CGC. In total, the CGC has graded 219 books, but only 18 have been graded in total in high grade. And the average print run of most comics at this time was 200,000 copies an issue. The more popular titles were even heftier. And let's just take a moment here and look at some of the record sales of the month for best-selling comics. We don't have the sales data for every book on the newsstands, but we do have about half of them. And what we find is that Action Comics by far was the best-selling comic book now month to month. It sold almost 500,000 copies. After that, Famous Funnies continued its popularity, 367,000 copies. That's quite high. And it's almost tied with Tip Top Comics, which is also very high at 351,000. So keep in mind, from the documented data that we actually have, those are the three best-selling comics at this time in 1939. Action Comics, Famous Funnies, and Tip Top Comics. After that, sales dropped down quite a bit, though Feature Comic is also still fairly strong at 310,000. After that, it drops quite a bit. Comics on Parade at 192,000. After that, the DC Comics seem to average out at about 170,000 each for Adventure Comics, Detective Comics, and More Fun Comics. And if we look at Western, they had two titles out, Crackerjack Funnies and Super Comics. They seem to be selling an average of approximately 164,000 copies each. Fox has 3 copies listed. Fantastic Mystery and Wonderworld comics. So if you divide those by 3, you'll see that the sales of those is only about 70,000 each a month. So that's actually pretty low. Of course, we're using the sales data that we have. So that's quite interesting to keep in mind about scarcity, about, what books are valuable just based on rarity. At this time, there were over 550 different comics had been printed in the modern standard format since 1933. So the comic books have now been around for 6 years, and now this new superhero genre is really starting to take off. This was a very exciting time for comics and the growth of the industry, where sales are starting to reach new highs. We're definitely reaching a new audience, and Superman is definitely leading the pack that way. If we take the Overstreet price guide, and if we were going to build a complete set of all 22 of these books, we can see it would cost us approximately $21,000 to build a low-grade set, or just under $400,000 for a near mint high-grade set. Keep in mind on the CGC census that the majority of these books do not even exist in high grade. So let's look quickly at what books do. Amazing Mystery Funnies Volume 2, Number 7, for some interesting reason, is the most common book on the list, with 4 copies have survived and been graded by the CGC as a 9.0 or higher. Also, Mickey Mouse Magazine number 46 has 3 copies graded. He was published by Western, and they always kept file copies, so that's why 1 or 2 copies will have survived from them. After that, Keen Detective Funnies Volume 2, Number 7 has 2 high-grade copies, and Adventure Comics number 40, with the first monthly appearance of the Sandman, also has 2 high-grade copies. Many of the books on the list have 0 copies graded by CGC in high grade, and the majority of the books in all grades condition combined, you'll see that the average seems to be about 5 copies in total, making these still all very hard books to find. So again, Superman leads the pack with Action Comics number 14, by far the best-selling comic book of the month. But it is Detective Comics number 29, which is by far the most valuable, iconic cover and key book on the list.